Today on the podcast, we are welcoming Christy Nichols. She is here sharing her journey of integrating her Christian faith and professional calling as a human services worker, offering her insights on maintaining boundaries, modeling beliefs, and growing in intimacy with God in the midst of demands of work. I am here with one of my new friends, Christy Nichols, who is joining us from sunny Florida.
Rainy today.
Are you guys surviving the hurricane right now?
Yeah. So we, of course, are always praying for the rest of the state, but we were blessed this time to not have any of the weather. We're in the Western Panhandle.
Okay.
So we're on the Florida-Bama line up in
Gotcha.
Yeah. So we're good.
I haven't really been following it. All I know is just like it's happening.
Yeah.
It's probably terrible because my family is totally getting hit by it right now on the East Coast, but I don't, all I know is there's a hurricane.
They would have let you know if they weren't going to be okay.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. And they're all more inland too. So anything having to do with the oceans is not. Well, Christy, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here and sharing with me and our audience a little bit about yourself. So can you kind of give us the lay of the land? Who are you? What do you do? You're obviously in Florida. Tell us a little bit about kind of that evolution and we'll kick things off.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on here. I am Christy Nichols, and I live in Pensacola, Florida, but I am from Greenville, South Carolina. We moved here, my husband and I, his name is Eric. We moved here 6 years ago because we love the Gulf Coast. We love the Emerald Coast, as we call it, the greenish blue water, and we love the beach. So we decided to have a new beginning when we got married, and we moved here. And let's see what else about me. I don't have children, but I have been mom to many.
Yeah.
I am mom to angel babies. I've been a foster mom. I've been a spiritual mom, and I'm a fur mommy to Meg and Minnie. They're my baby boxers.
Those are such cute names.
Meg
and Minnie.
So Meg is brown, so that's short for nutmeg, and Minnie is black and white, so short for Minnie Mouse. Yeah.
Those are the cutest names.
Yeah, they're my babies.
Oh my gosh.
When you don't have children, and I know even when you do have children, your animals are a lot of times your babies. So
yeah, I get that. I'm in the same boat. We have Winnie with a W, Winnie and Henley. And we came up with Winnie because I really liked the name Winnie and Winifred. And me and my husband are still like, we don't know if we're going to have kids, but if we do, I'm like, I really wanted to name, like if we had a girl, I love the name Winifred and call her Winnie. And my husband's like, that's a no. I'm like, okay, but if we get a dog, can I name her Winnie? And he's like, yeah, okay. So we have Winnie and Henley.
Sweet compromise.
Yes. Yes, we have Winnie in the form of a very furry dog as well. And I was just reviewing some of your background and everything before this call. And one thing that I love that you said, and I hope I'm not jumping the gun here, but you said something that I say, but you said it much more eloquently, and I just wanted to read it because I say something very similar. But you said you're a human services professional by trade, a Christian communicator by calling.
Yes.
And I love that because I say something very similar. I say like marketing is what I'm good at. Writing is what I'm called to do. So tell us more about your vocation and then your calling as well.
Great. Thank you for asking. I love talking about this. So my vocation is pretty interesting. How I got there, at least, is pretty interesting. Historically, I worked with children and families as an early intervention provider. So I worked with children from birth to 3 who have developmental delays or disabilities. So I've always had a heart for that population. And then last year, I sort of felt like I wanted to switch that up. I obviously still have a love for that. But I kept feeling like I want to do something more in the community as a whole. And here in Pensacola, we have a significant homeless crisis. And Escambia County, where we are, I believe it is still statistically the poorest county in the whole state of Florida. A lot of people think of Florida as wealthy and maybe where people go to retire because there's, Miami and where it's always, and then there's Disney World. But we're in a pretty significantly poor part of the state. And I just kept feeling like, okay, God, I want to do something more in the community as my vocation.
Yeah.
So I still work for the same hospital that I was working for before. I was working in another grant called Early Steps. Now I'm working on a grant that's through the government, and it is a community health worker training program grant. So I'm managing the grant. It's just my boss and I. There aren't any people to manage, which is different from my last position. And I'm actually enjoying being a project manager more than a people manager.
Yes.
And I get to just meet wonderful, passionate people in the community that want to help the people that they live close to. So we're recruiting people to be community health workers. And so these people have some sort of common characteristic or shared experiences or something that's similar to the people that they want to help. So for example, if you're an unhoused health navigator, maybe you were homeless before, and now you're working in a position where you're working with the unhoused. Or maybe you just have a desire or love for new moms and you work at an OB clinic as a community health worker, helping the social worker make referrals and set up lift services for people who don't have transportation and things like that. So we're providing a training program to help people get certified to be community health workers. And it's an entry level certification. So this is great for people who don't have higher education. They didn't have the opportunity to do that maybe. But this gives them a certification behind their belt. So that's my vocation right now. I'm a grant manager at a hospital. And I know that was a really long explanation.
No, I love it. Keep going.
So my calling, several years ago, I started choosing focus words instead of resolutions at the beginning of New Year's. And the first word I chose, I believe it was in 2019, was freedom. And I chose freedom because I was running from some things. I wanted to get away from things at work. I wanted to get away from things in my family, conflict and things like that, or even friendships at the time. So I chose freedom selfishly. But what I learned from that was God's always going to spin things and put a twist on things because he knows what's best for us.
Yeah.
So what I found that year was growing closer in my relationship with God. I actually grew and to understand that the only way I can find freedom is freedom in Christ. So then that just really was a springboard. As I continued to choose focus words, like it didn't take very long, maybe mid-year from then on out, for God to reveal what the next word was going to be. So that's how Gift of Three was birthed. And I launched my Gift of Three blog last year in March. And I just celebrated my announcement anniversary. So the year before that, I had made an announcement in August of that year that I was going to do the blog so that people could start praying for me. So my calling, I just knew, I've always known since I was a child, I'm going to be a writer. I don't know what I'm going to write. I love to write. So, I mean, I've always just written short stories and poems and things like that. But I really wanted to write with some sort of purpose. And God's really giving that to me now. And other things are happening too that I never imagined through that. So I've imagined that Gift of Three would grow somehow, but I wasn't sure how. And so this year I attended She Speaks. And by the way, I saw you sitting on a chair in the hotel that I stayed in, and you were adorable and cute.
Oh,
I should
thank
have
you.
come over to meet you when I didn't. I'm an
Thank you.
introvert. So it's hard for me to initiate interaction when I'm in front of people. So
You're good.
um, so I went to She Speaks thinking I would learn a lot about writing, even though it's called She Speaks.
Yeah.
And I was excited about the speakers that were going to be there. I've read several books written by several of the speakers, and something else started growing in me. It was interesting. I feel like a seed was planted. I got back and I told my friend, who I have told for several years, she's an evangelist and she's going to have a podcast one day. I told her all these things that I learned. And 2 weeks later, someone gave her a word from the Lord, and she came to me after church and she said, "This wasn't just for me, this was for us, and we're starting a podcast." And I was like, "Us? We are?" Yeah, I know we are. And so I didn't even feel like I needed to pray about it. I just knew, yeah, this really was from the Lord. Like things just added up.
Yeah.
Really nicely. Just it all aligned. So we're going to launch Small Circle, Big Impact in January.
Beautiful.
And I think that's just another nugget of this calling that God's put on my life. Even though it's speaking, there's we've already started the Facebook page and the TikTok and all the things, and I'm writing a lot about it.
Yeah.
And our planning requires a lot of writing and planning, and I love that part of it. So I know we're doing the right thing. And in addition to that, I had decided, okay, I'm going to start this book, but what in the world am I going to write about? So God's given me that over the last few weeks as well. And I've started the book. I'm going to go back to She Speaks next year, and I'm going to do the Writer's Day.
Hot dang. Look at you go.
Yes. It's such a busy season. So many things I never imagined would be going on, but I have found the most rest this year than I've had in so long, with so many new things happening. My word this year is intimacy. And it's like He's given me rest and big things all at the same time. And because I'm following that calling on my life, it doesn't feel big. It feels big in a good way. It doesn't feel
overwhelming or too much, or that's amazing. I'm so excited for you. And like, look at you go, like just turning around and like implementing these things. Like it's nobody's business. It's scary, but also you have me and you have anyone listening as cheerleaders too, rooting you on in the background. And I usually don't do this, but because you brought it up, I usually don't plug my own resources, but I do have a resource for anyone listening. And I'm going to be refreshing it for the new year, which is 2024. I have a resource on my website that is kind of a Kickstarter guide for people who do words of the year. So I have a very similar practice as Christy, where like I set a word for the year. And that's kind of, my focus word that I go forward with. And at the end of last year, beginning of this year, I put together a handbook, and it is a long handbook. But I took kind of the most common words that I was hearing from people, my friends and the circles that I'm in, of like, hey, what's your word? I actually just like asked people, I said, what's your word for the year? And what I did is I went through and I put together, each word has some podcast recommendations, some book recommendations. It has like a playlist. It has a, or like a song. I can't remember. Sorry guys. It's been a while since I need to refresh it. And then it also has, scripture, focus scripture to go with it. And then also like an image that kind of represents that. So if you guys want that, I'll drop the link below, but it is really handy. And if you don't have your word in there, let me know and I'll do it for the next year. So
it's amazing.
There's that. Yes. And only because you brought it up, Chrissy. So thank you for bringing that up as well. I think that's a really helpful resource. So walk me through a little bit, because I hear your heart for what you do. And I definitely hear God's stirring something different up in what you do. How do you manage the separation of the two? Because I feel like, in my brain, correct me if I'm wrong, there might be a tendency or kind of this like leaning to make your work an outflow of your ministry. Does that make sense? Or like
It
your
does.
ministry and outflow of your work, rather, of like working with homeless, working with young women, young moms, things like that. I would, like, if you told me that's what you do for work, I would assume that would also be like similar to your ministry. How did that kind of get birthed together, and how do you manage the pulling of the two? Because I'm sure they
Yeah.
each come with their own kind of demands.
Yeah, such an interesting question. I'm going to do my best to explain because I've always struggled with needing a job that mirrored and matched my values and who I am on every
Mm,
other level to a T. And
yeah,
sometimes it's not possible.
right.
I think that,
Especially as a secular job.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so right out of college, I started in early intervention. I had never even heard of it. I just had a psychology degree, and I'm like, what am I going to do with this? So
Okay.
I just knew that I loved people and I wanted to help people. Um, and I learned while I was in college that little kids were more my speed
Mm,
because I worked at a group home and I worked with teenagers, and I was like, they're much bigger than me and they're not nice and they're going to
gotcha.
squash me. So I think starting in a career like that and going into people's homes, I did home visits. So
Mm,
going into homes and being with people once a week for an hour, living in their world, meeting them where they were, that really spoke to me about. I could relate to so many of the families that had needs in different ways, different reasons. Um, I grew up in a single mother home with two sisters, and my mom had mental illness. And like, I had all these adverse childhood experiences. That's kind of the technical word that you would use,
right.
um, that were similar to a lot of the families that I worked with. And so I
Hmm.
just was able to meet with them on this level where I really understood and had so much empathy, so much compassion for them. And I have changed jobs a couple times in life. One of the most interesting things on my resume is that I went to nail school because I wanted to work with my husband in his salon, and I needed some kind of revenue generating job, not just to sit at the desk. So,
Gotcha.
um, and it was funny because I didn't see this until just recently. This was in my early 30s. In my 20s, I had prayed about the Lord opening a door for me to be in women's ministry.
Mm,
Well, I wasn't thinking about how I was still a little girl myself.
yeah.
And I wanted to be involved in women's ministry somehow. I prayed about that. Well, the nail tech position at the salon was my women's ministry.
Mm,
And I saw that after the fact. I didn't even see it when I was sitting there,
right.
but people would sit in my chair and I would grab their hands to start their service, and they'd just start crying and sharing their heart and telling me what was going on. And I'd be like, oh, let me tell you about this resource,
Yeah.
or I'll pray for you, or whatever
Mm,
it was. So again, this really like matched. It was just another thing that where my vocation and my calling just sat so closely together. And then moving here, I still worked in early intervention, but I moved in more of an administrative role.
okay.
And that's where things started falling apart. I was managing the grant. I was managing the $2 million budget. I was managing 28 people. I
Mm,
was holding things together, um, doing quality assurance behind the scenes. I was miserable
mm,
for 5 years. And people would still say, oh, you have such a great job. You get to make this huge impact. And I'm like, but I'm not. I couldn't see it. I couldn't feel it.
yeah.
And I felt like my values were being squashed and that I couldn't live them out every day.
Mm,
Um, I was still close to the Lord. I never like felt like, God, where are you? I never asked God why.
Right.
I know a lot of people go through that, and I
Right.
just didn't. But I did complain to him a lot.
Okay.
A lot. And I looked for another position for a very, very long time, and he was just not opening doors for me. And my husband would remind me sometimes rejection is protection. And I just had to keep trying to believe that, but it just felt unfair. And I wallowed and wallowed. I don't even know if I'm answering your question anymore. I was trying to get there.
No, you are. No, keep going.
I think that I felt stuck, and I was trying to find my way out of that. I was looking for positions. I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a huge pay cut. I don't even care. I'm going back to the field, boots on the ground work, being with the people, and really making a difference. And then my husband and I would look at something and we'd be like, nope, that doesn't work for the budget. And there was even a time where I finished graduate school in 2017. I went back way later to graduate school because I didn't know if I wanted to do my master's in social work or counseling. And I knew I wanted to pick one or the other. And I finally decided on human services counseling. So not like a licensing track where you go sit in a room and do clinical work. And so I was offered 2 support counseling positions, one with Bethany Christian Services, where I would be helping to support moms who were giving their babies up for adoption, and another one where I would be working with Medicaid only clients and being supervised and doing counseling with them in their homes. Well, I was offered both positions at the same time. And I was excited because I was looking at the budget. I'm like, this is going to work because I can work part-time here and part-time there. And the Lord just said, wait, you need to fast and pray about this. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to go say yes. They've both been offered. This is my way out of here.
Yeah.
No, I fasted and prayed. I only fasted a day, but I prayed about it a couple of days. And the answer was no. And I was so mad. And I grieved for the next 2 years. Like those were like significant losses. Like I had already had them and I was losing them.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, Lord, like I need to be somewhere where I don't have it was the work culture that I was so unhappy about. It wasn't even just that I didn't feel like I was making a difference. It was the work culture that had been built up in that department for 30 years that was sucking the life out of me. So I suffered because I kept my faith hidden a lot of the time because we had a very, very, I just want to say I embrace diversity. I really do.
Right.
I'm so thankful that we're all different and we have different values and different beliefs and all of that. And I embrace that. However, when you feel like you have to hide what you feel and what you value because you are trying to be so sensitive to everything else around you, it's draining.
It is.
And so that's where I was at. So I work for a Catholic healthcare system. And so reflection and prayer is part of the culture of the organization. But I had stopped doing reflection and prayer during our meetings because when I had done it before, it would cause side conflict that I would have to address after the meeting or just things like that. So when at my goodbye lunch, I decided, you know what? I've learned from this position that we're going to be persecuted for our faith. And you can still be, you can not agree with someone and still accept them. And I'm showing this to them. They can show me the same courtesy.
Right.
If that causes a problem, then we'll address it. But at the goodbye lunch, I gave my speech. And at the very end, I used scripture to wish them well. and to wish myself well in my new position. And so I decided at that time, the Lord helped me decide in this next position, I'm not going to ever hide my faith. I need people to know around me that my faith is my number one value, because if they need me, they can come to me and say, hey, will you pray for my daughter?
Yeah.
Or I heard you go to church over down here down the street at my father's vineyard. What's that like? We're thinking about changing. Or what resources does your church have? Or whatever it is. I can't hide that. And I'm just someone, my dad said to me one time, your job is what you do. It's not who you are. But it's always been hard for me to separate that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I think you bring up a lot of really good points, and a lot of points that I have also brought up on this podcast, and kind of why I wanted to start it too is like there is like the sense of like getting outed at work, especially in a secular environment. But you're telling me too, like it even happened, where it was like a Catholic hospital where, it really wasn't completely welcome. And so like, I just wanted to, the purpose of this podcast is just to bring it to light, because like it does happen. And like, while quote unquote, like persecution might happen at a bunch of different levels, I think it is really real. And like, I even have my own fear of like sharing my experiences about my workplace, because I'm like, what if, not that I'm saying anything bad, but like this podcast is my actual experience of what I've seen in the workplaces and what have happened to me in the workplace. And I'm like, this is what God has called me to do and called me to say. And there might be ramifications for current jobs or future jobs. And I'm just going to have to be okay with that, because, at the end of the day, like, I'm just speaking what Jesus is wanting me to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I thought of was there were a couple of people who were vocal about not being a Christian. One of them specifically practicing Buddhism, and another specifically saying they were agnostic. And one of them was one of the people that hired me. And so this person, however, has always, she's remained a mentor in my life professionally. And she actually goes to my husband to get her hair done too. She knows that if she's going to be around us, we're probably going to talk about our faith, because it's important to us. And she is fine with that. She's not one of the ones that's resistant, or, there's conflict necessarily if you're going to talk about it around her.
Yeah.
The other person, there's a lot of social and political talk frequently around that person. But I did get to be in an office right next door to her. And I knew that she would hear me talk about my faith with others before. I knew that she was witnessing how I tried to model my faith every day when we were in an office setting, because we did end up going remote. But I thought about it later, and as frustrating as it felt, I understood that the Lord needed me there to continue to model my faith for people who have those kinds of beliefs. And whether or not I realized it or not, that is a seed being planted by Him.
Yeah.
So there are things that I couldn't change, but I was in control of my behavior and the way I modeled my faith, and the things that I did talk about with other people that shared the same beliefs. So that person was still exposed to that. I don't know if that will ever change anything for them. Yeah. But at least I know that I still modeled who I am at the heart of my values.
Yeah. And I think too, like the one thing that I think separates Christianity from a lot of other world religions is how Christians move throughout the world. Because it's an outflowing of our hearts. And that outflowing comes from a relationship. And other, like, pretty sure between, like, we're the only religion with like Judeo-Christian values that values a relationship with God. The rest of it is trying to get your higher self. It's trying to get yourself to that next level. It's trying to either earn that faith, but it's not about relationship. And I think that if we're able to model God's relationship, I think that even for your mentor who is a different religion completely, I think that even models for her how Christians are different from other religions.
Yes.
And I think go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I think we've talked before about why she feels the way she does about Christianity. And so if you can be part of the reason why it is about the relationship and not the religion, then there again, there's a reason why the Lord has kept us in each other's lives.
Yeah.
There's a reason why she's still open to hearing me. And she's saying that I might be modeling this faith different than someone else did. And I'm not using the same legalistic language that maybe she's heard before. Because I hear that a lot from people. I hear that the reason they're resistant or the reason they've left the church or whatever it is it has to do with legalism. It has to do with man and not the relationship with God.
Which is funny because all of the world religions are all about legalism.
Yes.
I think it's more so, I would argue to say it's more so about what boundaries that Christians are kind of asked to follow rather than the fact that we have boundaries in of itself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point.
I was at a service and this guy was talking about how the two fastest religions for it was 18 to 25-year-olds. The religion that's growing the fastest is Islam and LDS.
Wow.
Mormonism. And he was like, you know why? Is because they give you a checklist of what you can do to get God's favor. And I was like, oh, I've never thought of it that way. That is so completely true. Whereas Christian faith, if anyone's listening to this and you don't know Christian faith, we believe that is through grace. We are saved and not from works, because there is nothing that we can do to bring us closer to God, because we're all sinners and we're all sinful. And it's funny too, when you said like, it's not about religion, it's about relationship. Again, another theme that I've had in these conversations on this podcast have been around the inclination to just build relationship. And how I think about the way we evangelize to people and the way we spread the gospel. And like, Jesus wasn't about, this legalistic law. He was about relationship. And that's exactly what you're saying and what we're seeing in terms of what provides or kind of moves forward the best and biggest fruit, which is relationship.
Yes, absolutely.
And the only other thing I want to add on to that, so I actually live in a very heavily LDS Mormon kind of community. This section of Arizona is very heavily Mormon. Not quite your Utah, but probably a close second. And when we always invite kind of the missionaries who go around and knock on the doors. Me and my husband always invite them in to have a conversation about their faith and our faith and why we believe what we believe. And one thing that was like insanely shocking to me was the question had kind of come up over the course of a few weeks of like, so why do we exist? Like, what is our purpose as like humans? And I said, our purpose is to be in relationship and to glorify God. And they don't believe that.
Wow.
They want to be amongst God, not serving him and not glorifying him. And that moment for me, I was like, huh. And I had to sit in that for a while because I was like, that changes a lot of my perspective, not only of Mormonism, but also of Christianity. Mm-hmm. And like, for me, it was kind of like, duh, like God's God. And like, he's bigger than us. And then like, of course he's great. And, it just like, it was these things that like just kind of came quote unquote, naturally to my brain, that I had the revelation that, hey, not everyone believes that. Even religious people.
Yeah. So interesting.
So, Christy, tell me a little bit about how you set up boundaries for yourself around the work that you do. And, you may or may not kind of carry it home, because I feel like you work with a lot of really heavy situations. And I feel like there might be the tendency to take it on yourself, and then also the tendency to kind of wrap your identity in what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I struggled more with that when I did the early intervention work, when I was younger and I was less experienced with work in general as an adult. You learn quickly when you're doing home visits that you have to leave what just happened in that home. You can take something with you to pray about, but you absolutely cannot bring all of that with you. There's not enough room for it. And there are times that I didn't leave it there. And I'll just say this, I've been in counseling most of my life.
Yeah.
Because I have to have someone else to talk to about these things.
Yeah. They say most therapists and most counselors are patients themselves. Yes. So, yes.
And I would say my friend Martha, who's a psychologist, she says the best counselors go to counseling.
Exactly.
So, it's definitely something you just have to be aware. So you have to have this level of self-awareness. And am I being a little extra snippy at home because I've carried some? Is it really about what's going on here at home, or is it about what happened yesterday at work when, we had to help this homeless couple get food and whatever it was. I think it's awareness, and I think experience helps you build boundaries. So for me personally, it's been about awareness, knowing when I need to go and talk to someone and get some help, and just learning how to set boundaries. In my new position, it's interesting because boundaries have come up with some of the trainees. So the people who are already out there doing the work, maybe who are just getting certified now, who before they went into the work, maybe they had not had a lesson in boundaries. They had not experienced what they needed to as far as growth in communication and awareness and that kind of thing. They felt led to go and do this work, but they still needed to grow in some ways as well. I've ran into that. And again, it's just talking with someone else, talking with other people at work who understand, who are going through the same things I have. And in our department, it's interesting. We're community outreach and patient education. So I'm the only person like me in my department. We have dietitians who work with diabetes patients. We have nurses who do medication and affordability and access to care for people who've gone to the ER too much. So there's a little bit of everybody there. So using my coworkers and venting and all of us just like the connection.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Making connections with other people and just getting it out and utilizing the resources around you, I guess. I think the best thing for me has been learning boundary setting, and I needed help with that in counseling. Growing up in a home where you have a parent with mental illness, boundaries are broken a lot. And you're the oldest kid and you're trying to hold everything together and you're playing mom and sister.
And caregiver.
You don't learn how to set boundaries with people. You just become a people pleaser and want to take care of everything for everybody, and you just can't. So I've just had to learn how to, okay, it's 4:30, it's the end of my workday. I saw that email come in or that text, but I'm going to address that tomorrow, and it really is okay. I can't save the world tonight.
Yes. And I feel like that's also really positively humbling when we also get to hand that stuff over to God.
Yes. Yeah. Because that's when you get to end your day with God and say, okay, God, help me with this tomorrow. I know this is happening tomorrow. This is coming up tomorrow. Please help me understand how to handle this. Because I can't do it myself.
And that's why I love the discipline of Sabbath. Because for me, like there's the rest element, there's the togetherness element. Okay. Like great. But also for me, as like a really controlling person or a person who tries to control, Sabbath for me is a way of reminding myself, hey, you cannot be in the world for a day, and guess what? It's still going to go. And it's that reminder for me, like that's what I get out of Sabbath is like, everything's still going to be spinning. Like the world is still going to be spinning and God is ultimately in control. And at the end of the day, it's okay if you're not in it for 24 hours.
Yes. Yeah.
So speaking of disciplines, what is one faith discipline that you would suggest that our listeners go and implement into their lives to help them grow their faith?
Yeah, so I know that everyone has a different schedule, so it's hard to pick one thing. And I'm sort of I'm more of a coach than a counselor when I really think about it, because I like to ask people, well, what are your strengths and what do you think will work well for you?
What do you do? What is one thing that you do that you think some people out there might be listening and think that they can apply?
And I think it's something common that you hear, but it really does work. And it's true for me. If I don't start my day with God, then my day doesn't go the same as it would have if I did. Realistically, I have to get up and walk my dogs first. So it doesn't really, that's not the first thing, but I walk my dogs, I get my coffee, and then I make sure I get up in time to have quiet time with the Lord. And something I've struggled with in the past is prayer. So he's so creative. He's helped me be more intentional with prayer by using a prayer journal. I love to write. So when I sit down to do my prayer journal, I'm writing 100 miles an hour and praying for all these people that he's laid on my heart or I've made a list for. And I'm intentional. So I think if I could say one practice, one discipline, start your day with God, pick something, whether you're listening to the Bible, if you don't like to read, find what works for you, but start your day with him. And don't forget to take him with you, because he does go with you after that.
Yes. That's
So,
beautiful. Thank you so much, Christy. And I love it. It's funny that you're like, I write 100 miles an hour. And I'm like, sometimes I can't journal my prayers because they're flowing so much from me that like my hands can't keep up. So I'm like,
yeah.
forget it. I'm just going to say it in my head. So, yes, that's
Yes.
a great
Yeah.
example and a great thing that we can do. Now, if people want to hear more from you or get connected from you with you, tell us where we can find you and also where we can find that podcast that's coming out in a couple months.
I know. So I welcome emails if people would like to email me and chat. I love that. So my email address is godsgiftof3@gmail.com.
Okay.
And Gift of Three, if you're interested in my blog, is giftof3.com. And there's also a link on there where you can email me to connect.
Yep. Awesome.
For our podcast, we've also gone ahead and started an email, small circle, big impact @gmail.com. And we've launched our Facebook page and our TikTok. So you can find us on there. We're not quite sure yet. We're still in the creative stages of deciding, where you can find the podcast and all of that kind of stuff. So we're working on that.
I love it. I love it so much. So small circles, big impact, and the gift of 3. And all of those links will also be below in the show notes. Christy, thank you so much for joining me. It has been the biggest pleasure to have you on the podcast. So make sure you guys follow her, give her some love, reach out to her. If you're listening to this past January 2024, go subscribe to her podcast, leave her 5 stars, and share the love as well. Don't forget to subscribe to 9 to 5 Faith. Leave 5 stars, tell a friend, send it to your mom, your uncle, whoever you'd like to. And we will catch you guys next week on the next episode.